FFT. Lori Ford is also on the phone, and she is going to be doing as we've done in past webinars, where if you have a question, you can type it into the chat box, and I will take breaks and come to Lori for any questions that people have. We're going to have everybody right now on the listen-only mode just because it cuts down on background noise. We are having some technical difficulties with the GoToWebinar today, so please, if you start to, like, if you lose me or things like that, if you can type into the chat box to let Lori know. Robin from God, what is it now? Civis, whatever they are. She is also on the phone, and she will help us out with any technical difficulties with the GoToWebinar. So either Lori or Robin for any technical difficulties. I will try to remember to talk slowly, and we will definitely, I'll take breaks during it for questions. Lori, was there anything else that I was going to add to this? Do you remember?
That's it for that part. And then also, if you are going to request CEUs for this, just make sure you log in under your own login, and then Robin will be sending you a packet later so you can get those CEUs.
Thank you. I forgot about CEUs. Robin, was there anything you needed to add?
No, it would be helpful if they typed into their question box that they would like CEUs.
Yes.
So that we'll have a record and they don't have to ask for it. So.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. There's a very large group today for this webinar. And I think that's great because this is one of the most important things about FFT, and that really sets FFT apart from some of the other evidence-based models, and that is the idea of relational functions. And so, okay, I'm trying to get my screen to move right now, guys, and it's not moving to the next slide, so there we go. Okay, so FFT, one of the things I think that over the years we've really started focusing on is the idea that relational function assessment occurs at all phases. So while in a lot of ways it's kind of, we almost separate it out into its own phase to make sure that it's distinct, that relational assessment and that focus on it occurs at every single phase. And so during the engagement and motivation phases in particular, we're assessing relational functions, and we use some of that to match the family with respect, and especially to cultural and individual realities, and also to think about how to motivate people. So if you think about in terms of if you're looking for ways to motivate a mom who's autonomous, it's probably not as impactful to use some kind of theme that involves her getting closer to her son or daughter, where what might be more impactful is using a theme that would have something to do with you want your child to be independent, you want them to be able to take care of themselves, you want to know that they're going to be okay, because that would actually match better to that kind of relational function. Now, we always make the assumption that yes, every parent loves their kid, every kid loves their parents. So in terms of a positive relationship, I'm not saying that it's a horrible thing to do. Just think of how much more impactful it can be if you, as you've made your relational assessments, made some guesses about your relational assessments, use some of those in your themes and reframes, and to see how the family responds to that. Of course, in behavior change in particular, we use what we know about relational functions to think about the skills that we teach the family and how we teach them so that we match to relational functions, and therefore we know from the research that it means that people will keep doing those skills on a more regular basis because it matches to their relational functions, and then it motivates them to continue to do it. In generalization, we want to also make relational assessments as far as how people relate to outside resources such as probation, mental health services, extended family, because if we can match like what we refer people to and how we refer them and how we help them to use some of the skills with those outside resources, once again, it just means that FFT is going to be more impactful and it's going to be longer lasting. So in relational assessment, our goal is to formulate the relational assessment and to plan for behavior change. And the skills as a therapist that it takes is the ability to be perceptive and an understanding of systems and relationships. Our focus is going to be on within family patterns, in particular in the early phases of FFT, and then outside family patterns in later phases. And so what are we going to do in order to get that? We're going to elicit and analyze information about patterns, and we're also going to use what we observe during sessions. So as all of you who've done FT know, as far as relational connectedness, we look at terms of somebody who would be highly autonomous all the way to highly connected. And to remember that people can have ways of being highly autonomous that are positive and negative. People can have ways of being highly connected that are positive and negative. And then, of course, we have midpointing, which is really the 50-50. It's not most of the time somebody's autonomous, but sometimes they're connected, because even the most highly autonomous person will at times do connecting behavior. But we're looking at the overall pattern. And if it's 50-50, then we would go with midpointing. So if we think about in terms of family first, when you think of like closeness to distance, it's really about when family member X relates to family member Y, the typical relational pattern, behavioral sequences, emotions, beliefs about each other within in the relationship is characterized by the relative balance of closeness, connection, and dependency, which would be what we call the contacting or connected, versus autonomy, distance, or a high level of boundaries. That would be the first part of it. Second is the hierarchy, and that is when family member X relates to family member Y, the typical relative balance or control and influence based on resources power reflects either a one up, a one down, or a symmetrical. The first and most important dimension of relational functioning is this contact, interdependency, or autonomy versus connection closeness. And we use the general three-category system, which is autonomy, which is usually referred to as like distancing, or I like to refer to it at least kind of holding somebody at arm's length, midpointing or balance, and closeness, which is contact or merging. And this if any of you have been around for a while will know that Jim Alexander created this slide because it like sets off seizures and ADD symptoms. But it's just kind of a nice way of looking at kind of the differences between the things. As far as somebody, my sense of psychological and emotional well-being seems to be not centered on you, or most of my connection is invested elsewhere. So if you think of a parent who loves their kid, cares about their kid, but most of like their social interaction, their interactions with other people are outside of that child. It may be with a spouse, it may be with a boyfriend, it may be with neighbors or friends, or the parent or child, either one, but the connection is really that their sense of well-being, their sense of interaction with each other. So if a mother is very connected to their child and a lot of interaction with that child, that's what we're talking about, connection there. Remember, though, it's not a specific behavior, but it's the pattern of that behavior, because the same behavior for different kids can actually achieve different relational functions. So you can't just say, oh, this kid runs away so they're autonomous. Once again, if the kids only run away one time, that doesn't mean they're autonomous. If they have a pattern of running away, and when they run away, they stay away for a length of time, and they don't have any contact with the family, then that could be autonomous. But I also know kids that run away, and the whole time they're supposedly on the run, they're calling their parent, they're talking to their parent, they're checking in. They may be just as connected when they're allegedly on the run as when they're not. They just may not be at the house. I also think of this as the kid that supposedly runs away, but they're gone for like 2 hours and they always come back. You have to look at what the overall pattern and not just that one episode of a runaway. So remember, pattern is our window to relational functions. Relational functions are determined on the basis of these patterns, not intensity of feelings or what people consciously or unconsciously want. For example, two people may love each other a great deal, but rarely arrange their lives so as to spend very much time together. While they feel intense love, their behavior pattern is of autonomy. Conversely, two people may hate each other intensely and spend much of their lives trying to find ways to ensure they never see each other. So while they may be consumed with each other in terms of thoughts, if their pattern is one of little or no contact, then their function is mutual autonomy. So the overall pattern of direct interdependent behavior represents the degree of autonomy, midpointing, or connection. Now, we've said quite a bit here, and some of this I have went through a little more quickly because I know all of you have seen these slides. A few of them are a little bit older, but it's generally information as an FFT therapist you've seen before. But I want to see if there's any questions before we go on.
So far, I don't have any questions on here. I'm going to kind of pause for a second in case people are reeling. One question I did ask Robin was whether or not everybody has a copy of the slides, because the one like ADHD slide from hell, which I also love, by the way, but it's so much information, it's good to look at again and again.
Yes.
I'll send the copy of the PowerPoint out after the webinar to everyone.
Perfect. I think that would be great. Yep, and that was one of the questions was, can we get a copy of the slides? For just that reason. The other thing I know personally, I haven't seen any questions about it, but one thing that's helpful was like the example of the teenage runaway, how that could be both. I always find examples like that really helpful. And I know that there is an old slide that has different examples on the continuum, so I don't know if you're going to use that, but if not, using more examples, everybody always loves that. So.
Okay, absolutely. I'll tell you an example I've been using lately, because a lot of times I hear people say, well, what they want, right? And remember, it's not what they want, because, and Lori, you'll appreciate this, if I got what I wanted, I would be highly connected to Kenny Chesney. Now, if y'all don't know who Kenny Chesney is, he's a country music star. I would be highly connected to Kenny Chesney if we got what we wanted, but unless I was a stalker and was going to be arrested, it wouldn't be appropriate. But I do spend a lot of time talking about Kenny Chesney. I spend a lot of time going to concerts for Kenny Chesney. I arrange my vacation schedule around Kenny Chesney concerts. But that doesn't make me connected to Kenny Chesney. Once again, I would, especially because he doesn't know me at all, it would be kind of creepy stalker-like. So that's what we're talking about as far as it's not what they say they want, but what do they actually do? What are their behaviors? Any questions so far, Lori?
Nope, and besides the fact, I had to put myself on mute because I was laughing so hard because I don't know if this stuff is true. In case anybody thinks that that's not true, it's actually true. I just want to.
I was surprised not to get some kind of reaction from you. So, yeah.
Myself, you know how loud my laugh is.
All right.
One thing I love about that, what you said is, I also hear that a lot, you know. When people say in session, well, I really want to spend more time with my mom. So we think they're connecting. And then we have to look at, but what do they do to spend more time with their mom? So I like that you brought that up. Thanks.
Okay, good, good, good. And I am trying to do something here with my screen as we're talking to see if I can. Okay, we'll go with that. So the behavior pattern is where we get our window to relational function. And that's why if you have been to a training that I have done lately, you have heard me harp, preach, gripe, stress, and lots of other encouraging things, I'm sure, about how important the behavior pattern is and how important it is that you get that behavior pattern into your progress notes. And so we want to talk about behavior pattern. The behavior pattern is what happens between family members when there's a problem and what happens on a day-to-day basis when there is not a problem. And what I see a lot of times is the only thing, if anything gets into progress notes, what's getting into progress notes is the behavior pattern around the referred behavior or the referred behavior incident. And while that is important, I think it's also especially important to look at what is kind of the day-to-day behavior patterns of these people. So for example, if the referred behavior was the kid ran away and it was the only time they ever ran away, while that's important information, we also want to look at what happens regularly when there's an argument or a conflict. So remember that a specific story about a youth coming home late is not a pattern. It's a sequence. But for multiple sequences or stories that the family tell you, then you can detect the pattern. For example, if the youth gets mad and runs away, it could be a one-time incident or it may be part of a pattern. You'll need to determine what typically happens when there is a problem and when there is not a problem in order to make your best assessment of relational function. So this is content, right? Stories or sequences that can lead to a behavioral pattern, and I'm going to use a case example here. So remember, when you're in a session, the family's not saying to you, here's our behavioral pattern. They're telling you stories. They're telling you why the kid's at fault, or the kid's telling you why mom's at fault, mom's telling you why dad's at fault, but they're telling you things that happen. It's from those stories then that you get your pattern. You don't have to remember the story absolutely step by step, but you want to think about this as what are the common things you hear in the stories that they tell. So let's say the family tells a story of an argument between the youth and the mom, and basically the youth says, hey, you know, I was really mad at something that happened at school, and I came in and I wanted to tell my mom about it, but you know, she wasn't listening. And mom says, well, no, it's not that I wasn't listening. You came in right in the middle of me working, and you know you do that all the time. I didn't have time to listen to you right in the middle of me working. And she said, and besides, you came in and you told me the story about something you saw on the news. You didn't say you had a problem at school. And I sent you to your room because I didn't want to hear about the story on the news. And basically you're hearing them go back and forth, and kid says, well, yeah, but then I tried to talk to you again and you started screaming at me, and then, you know, my stepdad tried to get in the middle of it, and stepdad goes, wait a minute, I'm just trying to help, and all it ever happens is you all blame me. And mom said, yeah, and I told both of you you need to grow up. So that's the kind of way the family's going to tell you. It's going to be back and forth, and that may be, for those of you who take notes during a session, that may be some of what you want to note is what you're hearing. Okay, so kid went to mom kind of put him off, kid kept coming back, mom kept putting him off, finally there was an explosion. Then they're going to tell you another story. Stepdad tells the story of needing Mark to clean his room, but when he tried to talk to him about it, Mark was disrespectful. Both of them went to mom to try to talk to her about it, but she told them to deal with it. They continued to argue until she stepped in and told them both to drop the issue. Mark then went and cleaned his room, and stepdad went and watched television. So you figure you got a 15-year-old male, a mom, and a stepdad. they report that they eat dinner together 5 to 6 nights a week, with stepdad cooking, mom cleaning up. They have conversations at dinner and report that after dinner they tend to be in the same room with everyone watching television. Stepdad and youth like to watch similar programs, and youth and mom have programs they like to watch together, but stepdad and mom have different interests. Family reports that the fighting occurs at the most once a week. So those are just other little things that you can note that kind of give you then that window into the relational function. So how might you document that in your notes? Family typically eats dinner together every evening and then is together in the same room watching television. Youth and stepdad engage around the television shows, discussing them and making comments. Mom is usually on her computer but in the same room. When youth gets upset about something that happens, he goes to mom, makes a statement that is elaborate or conspiracy theory type statement. Mom tells him to not be ridiculous, sends him to his room. He'll come back out and make statements no one loves him, or he'll try to start a fight with stepdad. Mom gets angry, tells both youth and stepdad stop fighting, sends youth back to room, goes back to room, comes out in 15 to 20 minutes, tells mom what happened that he's upset about. Mom tries to talk to him about it, eventually able to calm him down. If stepdad tries to talk to youth, they usually end up arguing. Stepdad then tries to talk to mom about his concerns, but she shuts him down. Family reports that if they ask youth to do something, he'll do it. Family used to do vacations together. Mom and dad used to go out once a week, but all of that seems to have gone away in the last 2 years. So the relational assessment, youth to mom, connected. He does the majority of reach out to mom, both when there is a problem and when there is not a problem. Example as far as what you might observe, this is a kid who might sit really close to mom during the session, a kid who might reach out to mom during the session. Mom to youth, autonomous. Mom keeps youth at arm's length even when she knows that dealing with the situation needs to occur. Youth to stepdad, midpointing. This one is harder to assess based on what's written in the behavior pattern, but there seems to be equal amounts of reaching out and keeping at arm's length. Stepdad to youth, midpointing. Mom to dad, autonomous. Dad to mom, connected. Okay, and then you would have mom as one up to youth, stepdad as one up to youth. And I didn't write that on here, guys. I didn't put that in the slides. I'm sorry. So I want to stop here after this first case example and see if there's any questions.
So far, not specific to this case example, but there was a really good question about how past events might, is it possible that past events can kind of create autonomy? And then what do you do to address that?
Well, if you mean as far as like if somebody experienced a severe trauma, yeah. Or, for example, a family that became more autonomous after a death of a family member because they're afraid to get close, right? We're going to go with our relational assessment based on their behavior. The nice part about FFT is you don't see something as bad or good. You see something as that's just how it is right now. Now, it may be in very rare cases where when you start to improve the relationship and you start to improve the positive ways that somebody is autonomous or moving somebody from a negative way of being connected to a positive way of being connected, then absolutely you'll see some small shifts maybe in relational functions. Bottom line here, though, is this. We are not working to change the relational functions from an autonomous to a connected because we believe autonomy can be just as positive as connected. What we're looking to do is to change the negative ways people get autonomy or the negative ways people get connection to a more positive way of either getting autonomy, connection, or midpointing. Does that make sense, Lori?
I think so.
Okay.
I haven't seen any more questions based on that one.
All right.
I did want to point out that somebody was asking about dad to mom in this particular case. Why would that be connected? So I don't know if you want to add.
I think that's a really good question, because at the first time that I did this webinar, actually for another group, they pointed out that I didn't have a lot of information in the behavior pattern. And as a supervisor, that would certainly be something to ask. Dad, knowing that dad does a lot of reach out to mom, so there's a lot of him trying to talk about the shows he watches with her, a lot of trying to talk about the kids. In fact, a lot of times he'll complain about the kids as something to talk to mom about. And so that is where that comes from. So unfortunately, I didn't document it well in this case example. Does that answer it, Lori?
Yep, and no more questions. I also pointed out from the little information we have in those examples, stepdad would kind of go to mom when there was a problem. He went to mom to try and resolve it. When the problem between mom and kiddo, he would try and jump in and intervene. So it did seem like he was trying to do things to connect. So cool. No more questions.
But definitely, I'm glad people, I said in the last time, I'm really glad people questioned that, because when I went back and looked at it, I was like, okay, there probably wasn't enough information there. And we know that sometimes that will happen. That's like I said, what we're looking for is you to get as much as you can, because then that really helps even your supervisor, your teammates, and things like that to help you make better guesses on relational assessments. Okay, so example 2. The referral reason is a 17-year-old female dating a 23-year-old male and lying to family about it. When she was caught, dad kicked her out of the house, but she's now returned. So the story that the family told about the referred behavior is that youth told dad she was staying with a female friend for the weekend. When stepmom asked where the youth was, father told her that she was staying with a friend. Stepmom questioned the story as she told dad that this particular youth she was supposedly spending the weekend with, that this kid wasn't very close to. Next weekend, the same thing happens. Stepmom tells dad he needs to ask more questions and check with the girl's parents. Stepdad says he trusts daughter. When daughter comes home, he tells her that stepmom thinks she's been lying to him. Daughter denies it. The next weekend, youth reports to dad she is once again staying with the same friend, but an hour after she leaves, she calls and is 1 hour away and has been in a car wreck. She admits to dad that she's been lying and that she's dating an older man. Dad gets angry, tells her not to come home, that he is done. He then tells stepmom, who calls and confronts youth, and tells her that she can come home if she agrees to no more lies. Youth refuses to come home, and family has no information to find her. There are frequent texts between dad and youth at this time. Youth comes home after 2 days. Second story family tells is of youth calling her grandma and her aunt to say she was sick and that her dad wouldn't believe her and she needed to go to the emergency room. Aunt and grandma go to the emergency room and find out that dad is home sleeping, and youth never told dad or stepmom that she was sick. Youth tells biological mom that she needs to change her phone number because her friends call too much. Since bio mom pays for the phone, she agrees to let her do this. Afterwards, dad finds out it's happened and tells stepmom, who gets angry that they allowed daughter to do this instead of making her set boundaries with friends. Stepmom reports in session that both bio mom and dad do not make youth follow rules or give information because they both want to be the favored parent, which leaves her as the villain. Youth states she's afraid to give information to either parent as they overreact, and that she can't talk to stepmom because stepmom doesn't believe anything that youth says. Stepmom agrees that that was true. Family reports they rarely do anything together other than watching television at night. Most of the time it is youth and dad watching television and stepmom by herself. Bio mom lives out of town and lives out of state actually, and is not participating in therapy. So what might you document in your progress note? Family eats dinner together 1 or 2 nights a week. Both parents work. Youth attend school. At night, if stepmom is home, then youth and dad are in the same room, watching the same television shows, talking about day-to-day activities. If stepmom is home, she may be in the same room, but doesn't engage in conversation and tends to go to her own room. Youth will tell dad she's going somewhere. Dad says okay. When stepmom asks about youth, dad reports youth is out. Stepmom asks questions about where is youth, when will she be home, etc. Dad can't answer, and dad and stepmom fight. Dad texts daughter with information that stepmom wants, and daughter gets mad, yells at dad. She gives dad information. He goes to stepmom, but she is still angry and feels nothing ever gets solved. Stepmom tries to give dad information that he should get from daughter, and he agreed to get that information, but then admits he doesn't get it. There is no interaction between youth and stepmom unless the issue is really big. Stepmom says she quit talking because no one listens to her and she is done with the family. Both mom and stepmom agree that if stepmom sets a rule or asks for information, that youth will follow the rule or give information, but that dad tends not to set rules or ask for information. So relational assessment, youth to dad midpointing, dad to youth midpointing. Dad wants to be connected, wants to be the favored parent, but he rarely asks for information or interacts with daughter other than to accept information from her. However, if there's not a problem, they spend time together and interact. And it's about 50-50 where it seems that there's a problem or there's not a problem, and that's where we came up with the midpointing. Youth to stepmom autonomous, stepmom to youth autonomous, dad to mom connected because he's always going to her, and mom to dad autonomous. Questions about this one?
So far, I'm not seeing any, and I'm trying to come up with some, but it makes pretty good sense to me.
Okay, I'm hoping everybody's still there because usually we have more questions.
I know.
In this one also, I don't know why I forgot to put the hierarchy on the slides, guys. Stepmom to youth would be one up. Dad to youth would be one down. All right. Note that the examples we use and the way that we talk about relational functioning are often cultural biased in that autonomy and connectedness are normed differently in different cultures, genders, and developmental stages. So all the assessments we made are comparing people to their particular culture and their particular comparison group. So like you wouldn't say a kid who was 5, you wouldn't expect the same kind of behaviors to show connection as a kid who's 15. Another way to think about it in terms of most adolescents are somewhat midpointing in that their friends are really important and so is their family. And that's why you have to look at the behaviors. How much reach out is there to the family or to a particular parent? And is it significantly less or significantly higher than any other kid their age? Questions about that?
Not so far, but I'm glad you brought it up because it's definitely something we've talked about because we do serve a lot of Latino families in California. And it's another one where you have to kind of compare it to the cultural norms. So something that may look connecting in another family may look autonomous in a family where the norm might be more connecting. So if that made any sense at all.
Yeah, no, I think it is. And I also think, I think one of the things I've shared with some of the teams is that we had it was just one of those things, you know, where things come in threes sometimes. Like we had several families we worked with at like externship sites across the country who had families where the mother was from Mexico, and when the kid got in trouble, the mother became very suicidal. And because a lot of her cultural identity was tied into being a mom. And if her kid was in trouble, then it meant she wasn't a good mom. Now, the interesting thing is it doesn't necessarily mean that her behaviors were connecting. The it was more about that role of a mom and failing at that role of a mom. And you can have that whether you're autonomous, connected, or midpointing. But what was interesting to us about it is like some of our families, Spanish-speaking families from like South America, we tended to see the moms kind of like throw their hands up in the air, not become suicidal definitely, although one of our therapists described, no, the moms I work with become homicidal and want to kill the kid because they got in trouble. So I think you have to keep those things in mind as far as the cultural norms and how you're comparing things. So relational hierarchy is the pattern over time of relative influence based on power, position, and resources. Once again, this is relative to age as well. Okay, so you definitely would, at 11, a parent probably controls more of the resources than a parent might control at 17, especially if the kid has their own job. But we're looking at parent one up, parent one down, or symmetrical. And hierarchy is a relational configuration between two people that is expressed through behavior and a broad range of communication channels and the pattern of influence they have on one another. Sometimes the pattern represents what culture believes should be. So the parent one up, the youth one down, but moving towards symmetry. However, often our families have evolved in a way that doesn't have that. Either the kids one up or they're symmetrical. Once again, we don't judge, but we attempt to understand each relationship for what their pattern represents, and we try to help family members build skills that will allow them to have influence in a way that is positive. So if a parent is one down, we're not going to change the fact that they're one down, but we're still going to help them to monitor and supervise better. So if a parent's one up, the balance of influence is in favor of the parent. Kind of what we would call a bad version of this is the parent demands respect or controls coercively, but is inconsistent in following through. Youth complains about the parent, but still depends more on the parent than the parent does on youth. The good version, parent is a resource, provides structuring and monitoring, ask rather than demands. Youth requires parent justify position, but accepts it even if they're grumbling. And I think this is a big thing. So a lot of times, if we break this down into very simple terms, if mom asks the kid to load the dishwasher, and they may load it, they may not do it in mom's time frame, they may not do it exactly right then, it may take them a couple of hours, or they may gripe and complain the whole time they do it, mom's still one up even though they're griping and complaining. Once again, that's a one-time incident. You have to look at the overall pattern. Parent symmetrical with youth, it's a balance of influence. A bad version would be that they're in competition with each other, kind of comparing list of injuries and or contributions, knocking heads regarding some behavioral issue, but more of almost kind of both of them have the martyr syndrome. The good version is trading responsibilities and lots of negotiation rather than setting rules. Parent one down, the bad version, the youth determining the parent's behavior more than parent determining youth. Parent complains but can't or won't influence youth to stop. And the good version of the youth is a trusted resource, provides positive structure, anticipates and responds without guidance from the parent. I had a family I worked with which honestly, if the youth had not had more influence than the parent, nothing would have got done in that house. The kid was the one who made sure the lights got paid, that they went to the grocery store. And yes, a lot of it was due to mom's mental health issues. But in that particular case, it helped that family keep functioning. So, here's where I put the assessment of hierarchy based on the previous examples. The 15-year-old male and mom and stepdad. Mom is one up to youth and stepdad. Stepdad and youth are symmetrical. 17-year-old female and dad and stepmom. Youth is one up to dad. Youth one up to dad. Stepmom and dad are symmetrical, and stepmom is one up to youth. Any questions so far?
Self-explanatory.
Assessing relational functions, some additional considerations. Remember, functions are sometimes not obvious. They can be indirect. So, for example, a kid and a youth who fight, but their fighting is really to bring mom in or to give them something to reach out to mom about. So dad reaches out to mom to complain about the kid, kid reaches out to mom to complain about dad. So there can be the indirect function. Functions are relationship specific. A parent can have different relational functions with different kids, and a youth can have different relational functions with each parent, with a boyfriend, with extended family members, etc. Family members will misreport and often misreport. That's why you want to listen for several different behavioral patterns and see what the consistencies are. You want to look at what you observe, and ultimately you can only go on what you have in front of you and what they're telling you. But what will happen is when you get into behavior change and things aren't going well, that may be the point where you realize, okay, what mom was reporting to me was that she was highly connected, but when I try to get her to do these behavioral things, she didn't do it. So let's try and do them as if she were autonomous and see if we can get her to do them that way. And so that's sometimes when you find out that either you didn't assess it correctly or they didn't give you all the information. So you want to look at where patterns typically end up, not what they intend or want, but where they stand relative to one another when the dust settles. So when we use relational functions in behavior change, it's important that the skills we teach in behavior change assist the family in meeting their relational functions in a more healthy manner. Therefore, in the case example that we use with the 15-year-old male who's connected, we want to teach him to talk to mom in a way that will help him to have a more positive connection with her, as opposed to the negative connection he currently receives while fighting with her. Also, we want to teach mom to check in with the youth and give a more positive connection to avoid the drama that takes more time and energy. That will help her to remain autonomous, but in a more positive way. In the example with the 17-year-old female, we need to teach dad the information he needs to ensure daughter's safety, and daughter how she can share that information, especially information that may be difficult for father to hear. A combination of check-ins through texting, writing information down, and having information needed up front will help them to be mid-pointing, but once again in a more positive way. In addition, they tend to avoid problems since they don't know how to solve them, so problem-solving skills would also be beneficial. All right, I'm going to go back here. Any questions about either of those?
Yeah, first on, I thought this was a great one because it's one that's always a challenge. Assessing relational functions when the family presents as everything's fine. You don't really have any problem.
So that's why you want to do behavioral get patterns that don't have to be about the problem. What's a typical day look like? What are they all doing? When kid gets home from school, what happens? When mom and dad get home from work, what happens? And therefore, you can make your relational functions, even if they say they don't have a problem, because you're looking at their patterns that they say happen on a day-to-day basis. Other questions?
No. Not so far. I'm surprised nobody's bringing up the behavior change ones, because that's always the hard part, is then how do we use it? So.
We'll give them just a few more minutes here. See if there's any questions about that. I think in the first example, one of the things I would bring up is this idea that even though we are going to ask mom to connect a little bit more with the kid, we're going to do it in a way that she sees how it's going to benefit her. So even though she's autonomous, she doesn't want drama. So she's going to be willing to get a little more to get less drama. So let's talk about then behavioral modification using relational functions. And remembering in behavior change, basic behavioral modification is about shifting focus to desirable behaviors and shifting interactions to increase desired behaviors, which then decreases undesired behaviors. So relational functions and behavior change means achieving a quantity of interaction with another family member as a result of behavior. Yeah, so at the time of the referral, youth and parents have been provided a quantity of interaction in response to referral problem behaviors rather than constructive behaviors, which thus reinforces or increases those undesirable behaviors. And some of you have heard me use this example before, but of my niece who is highly connected to my sister. And my sister and I were together, and she was saying to me, God, I'm really having problems with Danny. And I said, well, what kind of problems are you talking about? And she said, well, she's lying. And I said, well, I haven't heard. And my mom actually babysat the kids after school. And Danny at this time, I think, was 12. And I said, well, Mom hasn't said anything about Danny lying. She goes, oh, no, she's not lying to Mom. She's not lying to her dad. She's only lying to me. And I said, well, what kind of things is she lying about? She said, oh, everything. She said, it can be something small. It can be, she didn't turn her homework in. But, just little things. So I said, well, when you've caught her in the lie, what do you do? And she said, well, the first thing I do is she said, I'm not going to lie to you. I yell and scream and get really mad and tell her I can't believe she's done that again and da-da-da. I'm like, okay. And she said, after that, what do you do? She said, well, then I send her to her room so that she can calm down, I can calm down. And she said, then once that happens, then I go in and I talk to her about it. And I said, yeah, how long do you talk to her about it? And she goes, well, one time it was like 2 hours. And I'm like, well, Jen, for this kid who wants to spend time with you, you just rewarded her for her negative behavior, because she actually got 2 hours of one-on-one time with you, which is what she really wants, versus being isolated from you, which would actually be more of a consequence for the bad behavior. So we set up that the next time my niece lied, that my sister would try not to scream, would tell her that she was disappointed, send her to her room, would then go into her room and say, that I don't allow you to lie. It's not okay, and you're going to stay in your room for a set, like an hour or whatever it would be, and for you to think about it and then leave. And the first time it happened, my niece actually said, what do you mean you're leaving? And my sister said, there's nothing to talk about. We've talked about this. You know how I feel about it, and walked out. It took, the first time she was really shocked, and then it didn't happen again for quite a while. The next time it happened and she followed through and did the exact same thing, then it didn't happen again. I mean, I'm not saying it's never that the kids never lied, but she didn't have that kind of consistent pattern of lying again because she wasn't getting her relational function met. So with behavior mod, remember, positive, you add something, negative, you take something away, and reinforcement is about increasing a behavior. So positive reinforcement, you add something to increase a behavior. Negative reinforcement, you take away to increase a behavior. Punishment is used to decrease behavior. So a positive punishment, you add something to decrease a behavior. So like giving a kid extra chores. Negative punishment, taking away to decrease. We in FFT, we want to focus on increasing desired behaviors through reinforcement by adding something like contact or taking something away. So examples, positive reinforcement. Giving an iTunes card for the kid going to school would be a tangible reinforcer, where a relational reinforcer would be cooking the favorite dinner together. If the youth was contacting with the parent, as they'd actually cook dinner together. Negative reinforcement, taking away something to increase. A kid get off grounding for going to school, or if the kid was autonomous, the relational reinforcer would be getting the kitchen alone to cook the favorite dinner. Positive punishment, adding something to decrease, giving extra chores if they skip school, or if they're autonomous, that they have to help the parent clean up the kitchen together. A negative punishment would be taking away the iTunes account, tangible example. Relational, youth sent to room and eat dinner alone when skipping school if the youth was connected to the parent. Now, all of these said, once again, you also have to keep in mind not the relational pieces, or the relational pieces and tangible pieces. You have to keep in mind what is matching to that family, basically. So, for example, as a therapist, if you said to me, well, when your son does this, you should make him eat dinner alone, that wouldn't be okay with me, because my value is dinner, and I just don't. I personally have a hard time connecting food to rewards or punishment. I couldn't do it because it goes against my personal value system. And so you always have to keep in mind that you have to think about matching to your particular family. If you have a family that dinner time is their time, I probably wouldn't mess with that as a relational reinforcer. Maybe time they spend together watching TV or activities or things like that. Any questions so far?
Just a question, well, two questions, but one I think we'll do towards the end. But a question on some other behavioral interventions for autonomous people, for instance, parents, to use to connect better with people who are more connecting. So how to match to that autonomous parent connecting child, for instance, or vice versa.
Well, I think that, think of like kind of almost side-by-side play. I'm autonomous to my son, so it's easier for me if we like watch a football game together or we watch a baseball game together than if we would try to sit down and have a deep emotional conversation. Having very specific kind of tasks, like taking the kid with them when they run errands, so that they're getting two things done at once. Text messaging, emailing. Lori, you got any other ideas?
Well, actually, the person who asked the question put in their Facebook, which I thought, that's awesome. Using social media is definitely
Yes.
slightly, the way to connect without having to overconnect. So
That's funny. My other son, who has become more autonomous to me since he's living 7 hours away. When he lived here, he was midpointing, but now that he's in college, he's more autonomous. I actually find out when he's coming home from college through Twitter. Yeah, he posted on Twitter, and I'll text him and go, I hear you're coming home. Oh, yeah, did I forget to text you that? Yeah, you did.
Nice.
Any other questions?
Let me, there's a question, and it's really more about content, but I thought it might be interesting to have in this conversation. So for instance, kids who are dealing with bullying at school, but they don't talk about it with their parents because they're afraid that the parents are going to go talk to the school, and the whole implication of all of that. And then kids become suicidal because of it, etc. So what are some different ways to look at that through relational functions?
Well, first of all, it would a lot of it would depend on, kind of what everybody's relational function is. So let's say you have a kid who's more autonomous, parent who's more connected. We would definitely want to improve the communication so that the youth was able to share more with their parents about what was going on at school, and so that the parents could problem solve with the youth versus just running up to the school and trying to, to beat some kid up. So probably, depending on how that was, if the kid was more connected, the parents were more autonomous, the skills would be the same. The way we did them might be a little bit different. So it might be the kid writing things down if the kid was more autonomous, and the parents were more connected, like writing down what he's worried about and then them having a discussion about it. But it would still be working on improving communication skills so that they can talk about really difficult subjects, improving problem-solving skills so that they're problem-solving with the kid, not just running and doing their own thing. And then I think also in generalization, you'd be working with the family and the school of how do they address the issue in a way that makes sure that that kid's safe.
Perfect example. Thank you.
The other thing I would think, if the kid's expressing suicidal thoughts, especially with autonomous parents, is making sure that they are monitoring and giving them exactly what they need to monitor would be real important. As the connected parent, making sure that they weren't almost over-monitoring, like going through the kid's room, if there wasn't a need to. If there was a need to, absolutely, but if there's not a need to, kind of being able to set those boundaries a little bit better.
One thing I really like about these examples and why I thought this was a good content question is so much of it is going to relate to relational functions, and when it's a really sensitive issue like suicidality and bullying, those are both really sensitive issues, it's sometimes we can lose the bigger picture of we still want to look at relational functions and how to match that and how it's making sense of that pattern with those relational functions. So I thank you for doing that. It's a really good one.
We're going to go ahead a little bit more with behavior mod here. Remember that our goal is the attempt to reinforce desirable behaviors rather than punish undesirable behaviors. I just did 2 trainings back to back, and one of the things I kept saying is, well, what if the parents won't give consequences, or they say that the consequences, generally what we hear is there's no consequence I can give. I'm like, yeah, maybe not. It may have got to this point that consequences don't have impact, so why are we focusing on consequences? How do we focus on rewards? How do we focus on building up the relationship? So remember that the impact is more powerful when immediately and consistently delivered, and I think that's what we've got to say to parents. It may not work the first time you do it because they don't believe you're going to do it, right? So keep doing its consistency. And building up to weekly reinforcements is not as powerful as the immediate reinforcements. So even if a reward is small or minor when delivered, that immediate response is going to have more impact than like if a kid has to wait 60 days to get a reward. And I think that's the other thing, is that once again, those relational reinforcers on a daily basis or even an every other day basis can be much more powerful than the kid getting some kind of monetary reward 2 months down the road. So for my son, honestly, for me to spend time with him, even if it was only for 20 minutes or 30 minutes watching part of a hockey game or part of a TV show with him and talking about it, is much more important and is going to have a desired impact than if I bring him a huge gift from a trip. And so it's that kind of reminding myself that this is the way to reward when he doesn't do the drama or when he does the things that he needs to do. But you can put in those immediate rewards and then also longer term rewards. Important reminders, it's called relational assessment, not relational certainty. You're making an assessment based on the information that you have. If you're wrong, it doesn't mean all is lost. You can alter your behavior change skills or your generalization skills or your generalization goals to match the relational function. Usually, when a family gives you what seems like new information, it is the same pattern. The content may be new, but the pattern is generally the same. And don't overanalyze and try to figure out why they are autonomous. It's not important why, but instead, how do we help them meet their relational functions in a positive way? All right. Questions? Comments?
First, first, kind of going back to that behavioral pattern stuff, and the question was around relation or themes. And while we're not really talking about themes today, how might you present something like a pattern to the family via a theme, using maybe one of the examples that you have?
Well, if you're thinking about a behavioral theme, okay, I might say something like, so what ends up happening is that daughter lies to dad and you, whoever I'm talking to, okay, the dad, she lies to you, and you all end up feeling like you can't trust her, and you end up feeling like, oh, here we go again, to the kid, right? Now, I think that it's not really that you want to lie to your parents. I don't think that's your intent. I think that what you're wanting to do is you're wanting to avoid conflict. You don't want to disappoint them. You don't want to upset them, especially your dad. So instead of dealing with the conflict head on, you don't know anything else to do, so you avoid it as long as possible. And it's actually your way of trying to preserve some peace in the family. Now stepmom, I get that drives you crazy. That's the part that's really, really hard for you. I think that what gets lost for dad and daughter here, stepmom, is I think the fact that you care about her and that you want her to be safe gets lost in all of it, because you feel like you always have to be the bad guy. So you're always the one kind of setting the rules, and your caring and your wanting what's best for her gets lost in that. And then dad, I think in some ways you get caught in the middle. You want both your wife and your daughter to be happy. You care about them. You love them. But I think what ends up happening is because you kind of give both of them the yes answers, that they kind of feel like that you're taking sides even when you're not trying to. And so I really feel like we've got to find a way, one, for you guys to be able to talk about these really negative things or these really hard things in a way that everybody feels more comfortable, and at least you can share and figure out how to deal with them. How's that? You still there, Lori? Lori, are you there? Robin, can you hear me?
Oh, now I can hear you.
Okay, you can.
Yeah, I can hear you now. I don't know if anybody else lost you, but I couldn't hear you at the end of that, so I apologize.
Okay.
But Nanette said, very good. Thank you for the help on the use of the theme to help describe that. Another question that came up is on that gathering behavior patterns, kind of like you talked about in terms of telling stories versus feeling like we're interrogating the family. So you just speak to that a little bit?
Well, I think that's definitely what you don't want to do, is interrogate the family. So you want to take the stories they tell you, and then you want to, you can use sequencing, you can point processing, you can use other techniques that's going to gather more information at the same time as it's going to help you meet your goals. So if in the middle of the story, mom and kid are kind of arguing, and stepdad jumps in, and the kid then immediately goes back to stepdad, you can say, I just want to point out something here. I noticed when mom and youth were arguing, stepdad, that you jumped in there, and I'm guessing that you kind of wanted to try to help both of them, but I'm wondering if that's how they take it. And so then he's going to expound upon that. He's going to give you more information about that just by simply using the point processing. So I think you use some of your point processing, your sequencing skills, even maybe just strength-based relational statements, things like, so you all agree that you don't like this. So you're all in agreement about that. And, so tell me more about what happens. I think that will help you to gather the information versus going, then what happens, then what happens, then what happens.
Mm-hmm. What about, back to looking at behavior mod, Immediate reinforcement. The question was, is it important in both consequence and reward? So how to connect that immediate reinforcement?
You mean, I guess I'm not sure of the question. Is it as important with consequences as rewards to have immediate? Is that the question?
Yeah.
Yes, any kind of behavioral behavioral mod. Any type of behavior therapy generally goes for short-term rewards and consequences if you're going to put consequences in there, and then also longer-term rewards and consequences. I always share that when I grounded one of my kids, so a consequence, right? If I grounded them, it was short term, like 24 hours. But during those 24 hours, they were basically in prison, okay? They came out for dinner and that was about it. And so I think any kind of consequence, most of our parents tend to do things like ground a kid for 6 months and then only hold to that grounding for 3 days. And so I think that we have to teach also what's appropriate and making sure they're not giving the same consequence for any behavior. Because I'm that kid that if I was going to have the same consequences if I was 5 minutes late, if I was 6 hours late, I'm not coming home till 6 hours.
Right. Okay, I'm just going to read this question. What's the best way to build a relational focus when the family is used to being autonomous to do a history of substance abuse that they don't want to address it as it has a severe impact on the family? So relational focus with an autonomous family when substance abuse is in there, but they really don't want to talk about it because it's stressful, is what I'm thinking.
Yeah, I would probably work on some other skills first with that. So I would probably, okay, I'm going to assume that you've met all your goals of motivation so that they're motivated towards change if we're going to be doing any kind of substance abuse assessment, okay? If you're talking about how do you do it as far as building a relational focus in motivation, you would just use the techniques. You'd use themes around it. You'd use the themes about how difficult it can be talked about these difficult subjects. In behavior change, I would probably start out by doing some family bonding exercises because remember, family bonding is not about making them more connected, but more a sense of we're in this as a team. Then I would teach them communication skills and problem-solving skills that help them to talk about difficult subjects. Then I would do the substance abuse part.
So far, no more questions. You guys are coming up with some really good questions. Thank you.
All right. Well, if we don't have any questions, I hope this was helpful, and we'll let you go. We'll take a few more minutes here to see if any come in.
And just as a reminder to everyone, in case anybody hopped on late, Robin is going to send out the PowerPoints. So for some of those that you definitely, there's some really usable stuff in there. You can, read over it multiple times on your own time because some of it's pretty, it's pretty heavy stuff sometimes. So you might have to read it a couple times. Some of the behavior mod stuff can be confusing if you haven't done a lot of work with that. So those slides would be really good to be able to continue to look through. Ooh, hey, while I was talking, somebody asked, I know that, I just wanted to point out, there are examples of exercises, including bonding exercises, in the CSS under the Resources tab. So somebody was asking about specific bonding exercises. I don't know if you want to add to that, Kim.
Yeah, there's a whole module on family bonding. exercises under the resources, and definitely there's a PowerPoint presentation that has some that aren't even listed out separately. So look at the PowerPoint presentation on family bonding, and then also look at the worksheets that are listed under there. You can also type into Google family bonding exercises. If you've done any group work, where they do kind of those group building type activities or corporate team building activities, a lot of them can be used as family bonding activities as well.
All right.
Okay.
Everybody's saying thank you, and it was helpful.
Good. One thing to remember is now we've done this, we're all going to be looking at your progress notes for behavioral patterns.
Yes.
So here's your warning. All right, everybody. Talk to you all soon. Hope to see you guys, a lot of you, at the symposium. And we'll be sending out dates for the next webinar, but hopefully I'll see most of you at the symposium. Have a good week.
Great. Thank you.
Bye.